everybody, and welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, Philip Ripper.
Thanks, Philip.
Tony has the bad idea for us this week. Tony, what are we talking about?
Today we're going to be talking about Time Cube.
Time Cube.
Yes,
now,
the Time Cube.
Actually, way back in the day, in the early days of the bonus podcast, we looked at this website. It is a website, am I correct?
Yes, it is a website, although you have to go to the Wayback Machine or some of the other mirrors to find it now, because the domain expired and somebody put a gambling site on it.
Thank goodness for the Wayback Machine. That's a good idea, Tony.
I actually registered a reminder today to check in the day that site expires to see if I could be the future owner of Time Cube if they let it lapse like the last couple owners have.
So, what is Time Cube?
Time Cube is basically the brainchild of Eugene Ray, the wisest man on Earth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I was thinking like Socrates or Plato, maybe Jesus or Solomon or somebody like that, but no. What'd you say his name was?
Eugene Ray.
Eugene Ray, okay.
Yeah, and you can tell because he had the wisestman.com website for a while.
I love these early adopters to the internet that could just get like whatever domain they wanted.
Yeah, definitely. I wish I would have grabbed more back then, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was only 10 whenever this all started. In 1997, Eugene Ray shattered everything we know about physics and the universe. He released his vision of the time cube theory on a very basic website known as timecube.com. We basked in the glory of Gene's model of the universe, in which we learned that each day has 4 days in simultaneous rotation. We are all participants of cube divinity. Earth body 4-quarter time equals 4-leg mobility. We also learned that ignorance of harmonic cube theory is demonic.
Do you have any more of these good samples?
I actually have the website open up if you want. Let me just randomly pick one.
They're so hard to parse. Read some of these out loud.
I just grabbed a random
give people
one.
A flavor.
It is the absolute verifiable truth and proven fact that your belly button signature ties to Viviparous Mama. Honor the 4 days or you should die. Ignore cubic math at your own peril and of humanity. You have a godlike brain, parallel, opposite, and analytical wasted if you believe in one. The primary purpose for education is not subject matter, but subservice to accept any crap taught without opposing thought, destroying opposite brain to be submissive android. You are taught to be brilliant. No god equates simultaneous 4-day creation to Earth 1-day creation rotation. So it's just it's so much random stuff.
This sounds like a guy who's way further down the rabbit hole than the guy who invented Temple OS.
And what's weird is that Eugene Ray might have had some of those same issues, but
I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, well, I was saying the surprising part is that he's just sort of a normal guy. There are some people that went on a deep dive about him, and I'm going to detail some of the things about his life.
I do not know anything about this, and I am on the edge of my seat, figuratively, not literally. It makes a lot of squeaking when I move.
Alright, so more than all of these theories, we learned that everything comes down to 4s. This is why you only have 4 fingers, and why there are only 4 race complexions. It's why our heads are also cubes based on the face, 2 ears, and the back of the head. Another thing about this site is that he said that if you could prove him wrong, you could get a $10,000 cash prize.
How can you prove nonsense wrong? He's not even making a statement here.
The thing is, people latched onto this so hard, not out of belief, like flat earthers, but out of just, curiosity about it. So, timecube.com would end up being a huge phenomenon for a little bit. Let's take a step back from all this. Eugene Ray's Time Cube was one of the odder popular dark corners of the internet in the late 90s. He was the curious darling of many forums who watched from afar as this very basic website gained hundreds of thousands and eventually hundreds of millions of views. The highest tracker that I could see at his peak was over 270 million hits. For a while, we didn't have much to go on about Gene, but because people were so fascinated and the work of one YouTuber has been put together, we were able to get a lot of information about Otis Eugene Ray. We know that he was born in 1927, that he was one of 14 children and was raised incredibly poor. We also know that up until his death, he lived with his wife, he had multiple children, and was a grandfather multiple times over. He was a technical writer and an electrician, and it's kind of interesting just seeing how mundane he is. Like, you expect, like, with Temple OS and Terry A. Davis that there would be a lot of chaos, he'd be homeless, he'd be doing all these other things, like, where you're just completely splayed out. But he was a normal family man. In some of these YouTube videos, it's just, like, him hanging out with his granddaughter for a little bit, and, like, everything seems kosher. There's nothing that strange about him. He's not isolated from friends. Like, he goes and has, like, dinner with this YouTuber and these friends. So it's just a weird thing how mundane he actually is.
It really makes you wonder if there isn't some, I don't want to overstate this, but like if you have that kind of support that you can be pretty crazy and still manage to be grounded enough to survive.
Yeah, because it seems like he's the crazy uncle where you could just like talk about all sorts of normal things. Then you hit one or two topics and it just goes off the rails. That's kind of the impression I got from him. And these videos... And
there is a parallel here, I think, with Terry Davis and Temple OS in that this is a guy who is not stupid. At the very least, he knows a trade. He is an electrician. You don't survive as an electrician if you can't avoid zapping yourself.
Yeah.
So he is at least able to function in some capacity of his life.
Yeah, and he owns his own home in Georgia and all this other stuff. So it's like he was fine for the most part. You can definitely tell there's some mental health issues, but he wasn't a complete wreck, which actually really surprised me. When I was looking up TimeCube stuff, I was just expecting to see that. All of this information was parsed out from a young Australian named Richard Janczarski, who would declare himself the second wisest man and met Gene in his home in Georgia.
So this guy is an acolyte or someone who's just curious? Does he buy into the TimeCube thing?
It seems like he might have been into it in like a curious sense and kind of mocking it, but he went so deep that he just kind of rolled with it. And it's hard to tell like how authentic he actually was with it. And we're going to get into that more because that's more in the mid to late 2000s whenever all this stuff starts going on with him.
Okay.
Let's get back to the TimeCube site. In true 90s fashion, this was one very large page with giant text centered down the middle. Occasionally there would be changes in color, but mostly this was the home of Ray's ranting. Illustrations and diagrams for the TimeCube theory appeared, and make about as much sense as the text that goes along with them. However, on all of these, it basically says this cannot be refuted.
I have a question about this. I am looking at the TimeCube website on the Wayback Machine right now, and the thing that's not clear to me here is, does all of this show up and just appear as a whole body of work in one day, or...
It started out as like small things, like with some of the charts, and then just kind of moved on as he added more to the site.
So it's kind of like a blog, but without separate posts.
Yes, and sometimes things would appear, if they were important, they would appear at the top. Sometimes it would just get buried in the middle or the bottom. There's a lot of different Wayback Machine entries where you can see it kind of grow in different directions. But I wanted to talk about one chart really quick just to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at here. And it's a chart that shows the four corners of a globe, basically like a cube surrounding just a globe, and each quadrant has a line and a person attached to it. Einstein lives here for midnight, Jesus lives here for sunup, the Clintons live at sundown, and Socrates lives at noon. And I'm not really able to understand where he's going with this.
The fact that the Clintons make it in.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was the late 90s.
Great. Okay, I guess that's fair. But even so, you have Einstein, Socrates, Jesus, and then the both Clintons.
Yes, the Clintons. And like followed right under that chart is one that's really trying to explain the idea entirely. And it says, till you know 4 simultaneous days rotate in the same 24 hours of Earth, you don't deserve to live on Earth. Americans are actually retarded from religious academia taught oneism, upon an Earth of opposite poles covered by Mama Hole and Papa Hole, pulsating opposite burritos. The oneist educated for their flawed one-eye perspective. Opposite eyes overlay, Cyclops mentality inflicts static non-pulsing logos as a fictitious unicorn same burrito transformation.
Yeah.
That totally explains that chart. Yes. So you can imagine why every few months this appears like on the far side of Reddit where people are like, what was he trying to say? What meaning is there here? Like what? and it's not worth trying to decipher like the full meaning. Like you can kind of get an idea for what he's trying to say, that like there's 4 sections in a day, there's 4 sections in life, there's 4 sections in all this other stuff. But that's kind of giving him a little bit more credit. It's like whenever you go to thegreatestthinker.com and think that that's true, which is also a domain that he had.
Man, humble dude.
Yeah, very humble.
Give him that.
We spoke earlier about how forums propped this site up and how people discussing it made it popular. Well, it got to the point where Gene started making public appearances, radio interviews, and even debates at MIT. Radio personality Lionel was one of the first to give him a platform. In the late 90s, Lionel would occasionally call Gene Ray to get explanations about the time cube and get some meaty quotes. Lionel went from terrestrial radio to one of the very first radio online services called IATA, and like these tapes are unfortunately lost, but a few later things would come up. Currently, Lionel is hosting a show on Infowars.com, the notorious Alex Jones site. As a side note, Lionel met with Donald Trump in August 2018 and wanted to talk about QAnon and other conspiracies with the president. So this guy's still kind of a thing that's lingering.
So he's into this.
Yeah, he's
not just like, man, this is weird, tell me more. He's like, oh man, this guy, I think he's unlocked something. I'm going to get him on the show and have him tell people what he means.
He believes in so many conspiracies that I think he was just giving him a shot and he wasn't discounting it. Like, if you read the list of conspiracies that Lionel believes, it's pretty extensive. So I could see him kind of buying into it, like, on a superficial level, or just wanting to have, like, a guy on a show that's going to get the listeners to stick around.
Yeah, that's always the question. How honest are these conspiracy peddling type guys in their actual belief in the conspiracy?
Yeah, like, it's hard because, like, there are people where you know they believe, and there are people where they might just be smart enough to pull it over you so that you keep listening.
I really miss Art Bell.
Yeah, me too. George Norrie was always a little bit too nice to these people.
Yeah, but both of those, at least you kind of knew where they stood. They were a little crazy.
Yeah,
but they would tell you how crazy they were.
Yeah, but it was also like it was just good entertainment listening to Art Bell. That man was a genius. Anyway,
moving on to the actual topic. Sorry.
Back to this. I did find some early interviews, not the Lionel ones, but some other ones, and I was surprised that Gene's voice it's not very remarkable. You can definitely hear his age, and you can hear like the southern accent because he is from Georgia. In these interviews, he would repeat some of the mad ramblings of the Time Cube site, and he also detailed his belief in the cubic spirit, which is basically his form of God and the creative force of the universe. He would use these opportunities to denounce religion on the air and on his site, usually dropping some form of homophobic words and other derogatory terms into these. He was accused of being Jewish, and he did not take that very well.
That's such a weird fact to find out about, Tony.
In these interviews, he revealed that the Time Cube had been developed slowly over 20 years, and that he was the only one who had found this sacred knowledge. Then he asked the host of the radio show if he knew his father was a fish. He clarified that he was a microsperm fish, of course, but that's just normal.
Yeah? I mean, that at least I get. I can follow that reasoning. So, I don't know why you would say that to somebody.
It was such a weird, like, just out of nowhere thing. Like, he was talking about, like, the cubic spirit and everything. And it's like, oh, by the way, did you know that your father was a fish?
So, southern accent. You're not just putting that on because you know he's from Georgia. That's actually how he sounds?
No, that's how he sounds. Like I said, it's not the most remarkable voice. It's not like something where you would be like, oh, wow, I can see why he got popular. Just that, like, the deep voice. It's just a normal sounding dude that sounds like he's talking about the weather, but he's talking about Time Cube.
And how your dad was a fish sperm.
Yep. It was around this time that he posted that he had been called schizophrenic by a few doctors, and that he said that this was basically a result because they were too inferior to him to understand what was happening. And I've never been able to figure out if he was actually medicated or not, because generally when people can keep it together like this, there's some sort of medication involved. But if he's mocking the therapist, it doesn't seem like that'd be something that he was taking. It could also be that he was in his late 60s and it wasn't so much schizophrenia as it was just some other things where he was just mentally degrading.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't also know, so I'm looking at this quote right now. I don't know for a fact that he's actually seeing a psychiatrist. It could be read that somebody who had heard about him and heard his ramblings in much the same way that we heard about him and made our judgments, just said, I think this guy's schizophrenic.
Yeah, and that could have been one of the many emails that he got because he just posted his email address out there. Like, we're talking about a guy in his 70s and 80s that's promoting this sort of stuff too, so it's like, it could be a lot of different factors. On January 30th, 2002, Gene Ray was invited to debate his theory at MIT against a panel of students. A few videos actually still exist from this. Ray specifically requested 6 chairs, 4 for students, 1 for him, and an empty one labeled, Your God. Inside of a packed lecture hall, Ray would espouse his theories on cubism, while not really addressing anything from the panel. He mumbled and spoke fast, apparently sounding like Boomhauer from King of the Hill. People held up signs reading, Cubism is not fascism. Occasionally he would drop into rants about mathematics and how people are essentially pyramids, and that you can't say 16, you have to say 4 to 4, so you don't demean the value of 4. He got into some weird racial stuff on this about how there were only 4 races. There was Indian, Asian, white, and black, I think. And whenever people talked about being biracial, he was like, you're what? He did not understand the term. Like, there was just a lot of weirdness that started happening. But the students here were cheering whenever he made his points. Like, they were rolling with it in a way that seemed like they were kind of revering him. And it kind of emboldened Ray at this point, because he had these people that were trolling and just getting excited anytime he said something completely wacky, and it was reinforcing his beliefs.
Yeah, I understand the motivation for the students to egg this guy on and see what weird thing he says, but maybe not actually the best practice.
And after this, the trolling continued. People sent him emails showing their support, one of which was from a student who got his teacher's mother to admit that the reason TimeCube was being suppressed was because teachers had to sign an affidavit defending the Greenwich myth until death. Like, basically,
what is the Greenwich myth? Dare I ask?
It's the standard idea of time.
Like, like Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah.
Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah, sorry, I said Greenwich. I meant Greenwich.
But I think it's spelled Greenwich.
Yeah, it is, according to the spell check that I did on this thing. But this email emboldened him again because he basically believed it, because this person was saying that they needed to elect him like president of his university and all these other things, and was flattering to him and showing that these teachers had to sign this. Which kind of made me wonder if he was thinking that, like, other people did have knowledge of the time cube and were just suppressing it, because he was the one who claimed to only be able to understand it. Like, he's the only one on the planet that's smart enough to do so. I'm wondering how that made him feel. Then again, like, that's also, like, trying to understand more of the ramblings of, like, some sort of insane person like we're trying to do in this episode.
Yeah, you don't want to try to get these guys to be internally consistent. I'm looking at a quote right now from his website that consists entirely of words that says all words are fictitious. So, you know.
That's a paradox right there.
Yep.
In June 2003, Gene Ray got one of his first TV spots, getting on Unscrewed, a TV show on Tech TV. He used this to promote his theory, rolled through a few questions that were mocking in earnest, and watched as this pushed his theory into further popularity. He would go on to lecture at Georgia Tech. He released a DVD that was selling his lectures at these events. And he continued to be sort of mocked but revered at the same time. One of the questions that you were able to see on the trailer, which this DVD seems to have been lost to time, like nobody's posted the full thing yet. One of them is a young man asking how he can use TimeCube to get a date, like how he can apply those theories to help him in his love life. So people are just kind of getting a little bit weird with him. I really wish I could have found that DVD.
How do you lose that documentary?
They were selling it for a while, and then like the site that was selling it went under, and nobody has like a copy that they've uploaded. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. It's like the DashCon DVD. I want that.
Which DVD?
DashCon. Apparently there's like a documentary produced by the people who made it, and nobody ever got it out.
I mean, if you didn't ever distribute it, that's one thing. But for somebody to sell this on their website and then it just to disappear into the ether and nobody uploads it to YouTube or puts it on Pirate Bay or anything like that, that's weird.
Yeah, it's a shame. It really is.
Especially for somebody this popular, relatively speaking.
And it's like, I know somebody had to have bought it. It was only $8 plus like $2 shipping. It was at this point that Gene Ray gave himself a doctorate in cubism because normal universities wouldn't accept his principles or offer him an honorary doctorate.
What? The fools. I like that loophole that he found, though.
Yeah, like, I mean, he's Dr. Ray now. Around this time, Richard Janczarski started to promote cubism, and he was known as Cubehead online. He also started a YouTube channel in which he vlogged about the truth of cubism. His tone sounded very mocking at first, but slowly this developed into correspondence with the Time Cube Lord himself, Eugene Ray. He also launched a cubic awareness online site which gave updates on the Time Cube and tried to apply it through various maxims to show you why it was completely true. His YouTube channel still exists under the name Pyramid Ores. It's Pyramid
Ores? Like iron ore?
Pyramid 0RZ. Because people that were in the Time Cube thing were basically pyramid-shaped because of the principles of cubism. And so
obviously.
Pyramiders, basically. Like, it's a weird way of talking about cubism.
I got it. Okay.
Although they hit it off in some ways, Eugene Ray had to update his site to say that timecube.com was the only official site and you must beware his associates. No one else has his wisdom. Even with this rift between the two, Eugene Ray allowed Richard to come visit him in Georgia. The long flight from Australia seemed to show on Richard, who was noticeably subdued in these interview videos compared to what he normally filmed. Like, most of the vlogs, he was high energy and he was yelling at the camera, and in these, there was a lot of him just interviewing Eugene Ray, asking questions, and he was just like, yeah, oh, cool, man, cool. And, like, it just seemed like it was so subdued from what he'd done before. And I'm trying to figure out if it was just because he was off script, or if meeting his hero was a letdown, or if he just amps it up for those videos. But I really did like that these videos showed the very human side of Ray. It showed him at dinner with friends. It showed him talking to his granddaughter where she gives him a big hug and they're just having a good time. Like, it's all very simple stuff. And he also gets into the meat of different things about Time Cube and starts talking about his different theories. It's uploaded in a bunch of 10-minute segments because at the time, I think this was 11 years ago, YouTube only allowed 10-minute videos. So it's kind of one of those things where it's also an interesting time capsule to go back and check it out. He did show a few of the things where there's a disconnect in reality and some delusions of grandeur. When he went into Eugene Ray's shed, there were just boxes and boxes of notes, and he said that someday that those would be worth more than the notes of Galileo, on which he also went on to disprove Galileo through his own weird ways.
Yep. Well, Galileo was one of those dirty oneists.
Yeah, he was definitely a oneist. And, like, that whole heliocentric thing, yeah, no. All of the interviews that were posted seemed to anger Eugene Ray, though. As after they started to come out, at the top of his website, he bashed Richard's site and channel, saying that he trashes my site with his data and erroneous prophecy crap. I denounce CubicAO.tk as harmful to TimeCube and a copyright infringement. We cannot really know if this is a main contributor and what would happen next. But after this, Richard Janczarski would end up committing suicide in February of 2008. It would
There's a twist.
It would later be revealed from his friends on Facebook that he threw himself in front of a train in front of a crowd of people. His friends also revealed that Richard had been receding for a while now, a lot of times drinking alone, and had been posting pro-Nazi and white supremacist propaganda as he slid further into depression.
Whew.
Yeah, it got dark. It took a hard turn there.
Yeah, we've been having fun with this, and then this guy commits suicide after kind of being a jerk to a lot of people.
Yeah, and once again, I can't tell if, like, this was just him, like, getting to the end of his rope. If he fully believed in TimeCube and had, like, this guy bashing him like that, I could see that leading somebody down a worse path, but I could also see it just being, like, he was just done and he had a lot of other mental issues going on and just decided to kill himself. We don't know exactly how important it was to him about this time cube theory. The people that went on to the forums where they actually had entire forums related to time cubism, and like they were talking about just how far he'd come and how he was engrossed in the time cube world. But once again, I couldn't tell if he actually believed it or not.
His website appears to still be up, by the way.
It is.
There's CubicAO.tk.
Yep, that one is still up.
I wonder who is paying the rent on that server.
I'm not sure. It could be his parents. It could be any number of things, but I'm glad that somebody still has it up. Eugene Ray did not seem to acknowledge the death of Richard. He continued pushing forward on the book that was going to be the single most important book written for humanity. He also asked for donations on PayPal, saying that without their support, Cubism would die. His rants started to get more violent, calling Americans and educated people stupid and evil. He also created a Twitter account of short-form rants without context. Things like, God lied, he did not create 1 day, I created 4 days, as well as your father is a fish, you evolved from an egg, laid in water fertilized by a sperm fish. Maybe you should worship a fish god. Like, he just started disconnecting more and more, and it was around this time that he stopped doing any sort of posts on his website, and for years these posts had been getting less sensical, like nearly randomly generated text. In May of 2012, he would make his final post on TimeCube, ending with, "Children will be blessed for killing educated adults." It would be about 3 years after this. He still kept the site running, but he didn't do anything with it, that he would pass away in March of 2015. He was 87 years old, so he did live a pretty good long life.
Well, good is debatable.
Good is debatable,
definitely
but
long.
Yeah, definitely. But that's basically the end of TimeCube there. There have been a lot of times where the site has been pulled down and people have re-put it back up. The Wayback Machine has it. Nobody seems to have tried to continue the legacy of TimeCube because I don't think it ever turned into an actual movement, which almost surprises me with the internet now. That seems like if Flat Earth can find a way, TimeCube should be able to find a way. But there's so much of it that's incomprehensible that it's kind of hard to argue. So I guess...
Yeah, at least the benefit that the flat Earth theory has is that you can say what it is.
Yeah.
Like, it has a statement of truth that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, it's not like our clear as mud description of what TimeCube actually is in this episode. I'm betting that if you've never heard of this, you know less about what timecode is now than you did before.
I do want to say, knowing everything that I know about this man at this point, it's surprising to me. I'm looking again on this website, and he's not what... I'm surprised at how few typos there are on this. Like, I don't see any misspelled words. He's got...
well, he was a technical
sentences...
writer for a while, so I think that kind of helped with that. There's stuff where it's like grammatically bad or it's kind of jilted, but you don't really get many issues with the spelling, especially because this was 2007, so not everything had spelling stuff built in.
Yeah, again, we come back to one of these people who is definitely a little off in their thinking. Maybe a lot off in one part of their thinking, and yet is not stupid. Does not, I think, deserve to be made fun of in any capacity. Maybe don't buy into the things that these guys say, like Terry Davis with Temple OS or this man with his TimeCube. But the fact that in spite of this oddness, he was able to survive, able to provide for a family, and it seems like support even grandchildren, that's something that has worth, to me at least.
And it makes it so it's not quite like a full-on tragedy. Like, there's some stuff here that's depressing, and like Richard Janczarski, I think is how you say his name, like that is definitely a tragedy. But he himself was not like Terry Davis, where it just ended in a horrid bad way. He was able to just do this as a weird side project, a side obsession, while he maintained while he maintained his life.
And maybe, again, not to take away from the badness of this idea, but if you're going to take anything away from the TimeCube as an actual lesson, it's that being on your own, being a one, is difficult.
Yeah.
Even for somebody completely sane. I don't know if the number 4 is particularly significant, but at least this man had people who were able to support him and help him in his sort of odd pursuit.
Yeah, well, it's like you look at the difference between Terry A. Davis whenever he was living with his parents and whenever he was on the street and how fast that degraded.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad that he was able to have a family and do all that. Like, I think the bad ideas here are actually more directed at the people who propped him up and gave him a platform. It's like you're inviting him to MIT and you're doing all these other things. And I'm sure it's not that difficult to get a speaker into a place like that, where you're basically taking over a lecture hall. Yeah, back then it wasn't as bad. Now it's like you got people protesting Sam Harris and people like that all the time whenever they try to go to campuses.
Yeah,
so
and those guys are at least saying a thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, even if you don't like it, you can at least say that they have a point.
Yeah. But like it seems like people just treated this as entertainment. They didn't take it too seriously. Like they went to see him because it was an oddity, not because it was like they wanted to actively make fun of him, or most of the people.
I definitely understand that impulse, but I agree with you that indulging this as far as it was indulged probably wasn't helpful to him. The other bad idea I would point out is believing that you're the one person who's found the knowledge of the universe.
Yeah, that's always a bad idea.
Position, if you find yourself saying, I am the only one who knows, you probably aren't.
I mean, that's the whole thing about prophets. It's always fascinating how you can get to that point. That's why I'm obsessed with cults.
Like, the universe is not made of secrets, right? The things that you need to do are obvious and open to you. They're the things that have been said so often that they've become trite. But if you can find a way to do them, they do work.
Yep.
You don't have to find some new symbolism of time cubes and whatnot.
Unless you're a crazy physicist and you can actually prove it. Then that might be different. But that's an entirely different topic. We've covered a lot of bad ideas today, but I want to give you a good idea, and that good idea is going to patreon.com/humanechoes and giving us a few dollars a month to keep this thing rolling. You also get an off-topic podcast done by all of us at Human Echoes, or you can check out our YouTube stuff. We've got youtube.com/humanechoes. We started a new gaming which is Human Echoes Gaming. We'll have a link in the description on the YouTube site. And also, thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening to Bad Ideas. We will see you guys next week with another episode.